Andrea Ross is the author of Let the Lions Roar, The Evolution of Brookfield Zoo. While working on the zoo history book, Andrea became aware of Edith Rockefeller McCormick's remarkable life story. After 10 years of research, writing, and revising, Edith the Rogue Rockefeller McCormick was released in August of 2020. It won the Chicago Writers Association Book of the Year Award for traditional nonfiction. So, with that, please welcome Andrea Ross.
Good morning, everybody. Thank you so much, Bob, for getting this set up. And a shout out to Rick Peterson sitting in the back there, who is the one who got this all started in the first place. So thank you. I love talking about Edith. So a full room of people eager to hear about her is kind of a dream come true for me. Get my remote all set up. All right. So I first learned about Edith many years ago when I was writing the zoo book, the Let the Lions Roar, the history book for Brookfield Zoo, because she gave the land that started the zoo. So, but it took me a long time to kind of settle on her as a character and to do all the research and figure out all there was to learn about her. There are many books about Edith's father, John D. Rockefeller, the oil tycoon, and her brother, the great philanthropist. But information on Edith is scattered. Many historians believe that her papers were destroyed after her death. So piecing together her life was a bit of a scavenger hunt, collecting a few letters of correspondence here, some recollections from friends or family there, scouring newspaper accounts and steamer manifests until I gradually assembled a more complete picture of this enigmatic woman. Growing up Rockefeller was not what you would think. Bessie, Alta, Edith, and John D. Jr. grew up first in Cleveland and later in New York City. Their lives were filled with prayer, study, duty. For her father and mother, both devout Baptists, the priority was serving the Lord and keeping personal desires in check. Her mother's favorite maxim was, "Is it right? Is it duty?" The children likely had no idea of their family's incredible wealth. They earned pennies by catching flies, pulling weeds, and practicing music. And they had to account for every penny. That money was intended for the church plate, not for spending. As a little girl, every hour of Edith's day was scheduled and efficiently occupied. That was a habit that would stay with her. But the piety, the diligence, and the constant denial would have lifelong repercussions. And there was fear. Once the family moved to New York City and Edith was in her teen years, the hate began to seep in. As one of the nation's richest men, John D. Rockefeller received tremendous amounts of mail requesting financial help from organizations and individuals in dire circumstances. Mixed in with these pleas for assistance were hate letters and threats. Strangers camped out on their doorstep or followed their father to work. And due to his ruthless business practices, there were front-page cartoons lampooning him. Edith began to learn that the world was a scary place. All of the siblings and the parents developed nervous ailments, and the lifelong processional in and out of sanatoriums began in order to treat their headaches, their shattered nerves, and their digestive ailments. In piecing together Edith's life, it is helpful to look at what other biographers have written about the male members of her family, the women not having received much attention thus far. Rockefeller biographer Ron Chernow writes, Jr. developed an upside-down worldview in which the righteous Rockefeller household was always under attack by a godless, uncomprehending world. Similarly, the authors of the Rockefeller century surmised that a childhood perpetually concerned with introspective soul-searching and striving to perfect one's conduct left Junior with both a lifetime creed and an initial fear of normal social conduct. And this rings true for Edith as well. Education was prized in the family. Books were safe. Learning was safe. In later years, Edith was quoted as saying, "I must feed my mind more than my body." As I researched, it became obvious that while the family was close-knit and the three daughters were clearly loved, it was Edith's brother Junior who got the best of everything. The only son, the heir apparent. When Junior was a teenager, Father created a private school for him and other like-minded young men. Two of the boys who joined Junior in these studies were Harold and Stanley McCormick, sons of Cyrus McCormick, the Reaper King. And young Harold, blue-eyed, fun-loving, whistling, captured Edith's fancy and slowly became part of the family. They married in November of 1895. Their wedding did not go as planned, not even remotely. The details of that story are best saved for another day, but I'll just share with you that Harold came down with pleurisy, and instead of the large church wedding that Edith had been planning, they wed in his small hotel suite. And though the ceremony was planned for noon, a sudden fierce storm turned New York City dark as midnight, and the rain fell in torrents. Thunder and lightning seeming to express Mother Nature's displeasure. It was not the grandest of starts. The newlyweds spent 3 years in Council Bluffs, Iowa, where Harold learned the family business at McCormick Harvester. Years later, Edith would reflect on this time as perhaps the happiest in her life. She set about creating a household, ordering monogrammed handkerchiefs and linens, hiring staff, and beginning her assemblage of priceless antiques. Finally allowed to spend money, she did so, and with gusto. Harold seemed to enjoy his work as a salesman, putting his gregarious nature to good work. Their first child, John Rockefeller McCormick, was born in Iowa. Then they moved to Chicago, where a second son, Harold Fowler McCormick Jr., to be called Fowler, was born. They purchased a home on the north side of the city, which was dubbed McCormickville because so many of the relatives lived there, including Harold's mother, sister, and brother. The address was 1000 Lakeshore Drive. She called it the Bastion. It had a massive ornamental gate surrounding the property. It felt secure, truly secure. She could lock out the world. Edith and Harold set out to make it a show place, working with antique dealers to gather an astounding collection of treasures. One of Edith's prized possessions was the gilded silver dinner service that Napoleon gave to his sister upon her marriage to the Prince Borghese. 1,600 pieces. She had the entire set. She had some of Napoleon's actual chairs, too, in the dining room with his initials. Her bedroom was decorated in Louis XVI, from the large canopy bed to the gilded dressing table and an elegant carved writing table. Her collection of fine laces was museum quality, primarily Flemish and Italian, many dating back to the 15th century. And her jewels. She had some of the Russian crown jewels, 10 of Catherine the Great's emeralds, spaced between some 1,000 diamonds. Her pearls, perfectly matched, were later appraised at $2 million. Edith's grand plan was to turn her house into a museum after her death. She was amassing these treasures, bringing them to this country so that Chicago could have these showpieces. But in the meantime, she would enjoy them. Edith and Harold had a summer home built in Lake Forest, an Italian villa overlooking the lake. But sadly, because of events about to unfurl, this magnificent home, which they called Villa Turicum, would never really be lived in. The money was flowing out. Jewels, antiques, portraits of both her and Harold, tapestries, and donations, so many donations. While her father and brother were primarily focused on education and medicine for their philanthropies at the time, Edith's focus was the arts, music, theater, art, and most notably, opera. Edith and Harold were among a group of city leaders who spearheaded efforts to create a resident opera company in Chicago. They poured huge amounts of money into the endeavor, often fronting the ticket revenue at the beginning of the season to the tune of hundreds of thousands of dollars. It was a daunting undertaking. In the first season, 1909 to 1910, they performed 21 different operas, most of them only 2 or 3 times. In Edith's own words, it is only the cities which have reached a certain cultural height which have opera. From my point of view, opera is a proof of culture, and therefore not to be considered as a luxury, but to be considered as a biological necessity. For human development is measured by culture. Where there is no culture, there is no actual development. It was a busy time. Edith and Harold were among a handful of guarantors who backed the purchase price for the new orchestra hall, giving a permanent home to Theodore Thomas's new resident orchestra. And Edith, alongside Jane Addams and others, helped found the Three Arts Club, which offered dormitory rooms and dining facilities for struggling young female artists. Harold's great passion at the time was aviation. A true McCormick, he loved to tinker, and he worked with various leading aviators to promote a few aircraft designs himself, including this umbrella plane and something he called the mustard plaster. Harold helped organize the first international aviation meet in Chicago. You know it as the Air and Water Show. This was in 1909. It was an event at which many Chicagoans got their first glimpse at airplanes. Sadly, many also witnessed tragedy as 2 pilots fell to their deaths attempting stunts. By now, Edith's house, the Bastion, was full. There was a bustling contingent of 17 servants servicing the family: cooks, sewing ladies, charwomen, footmen, chauffeurs, and nurses and governesses for the children. Edith and Harold had 5 children. Firstborn Jack and his brother Fowler would later be joined by 3 girls, Muriel, Editha, and Mathilde. But delighted though they were with these descendants, it was likely the children that caused Edith's life to take a sharp turn. In 1902, Jack suddenly died of scarlet fever, and just a few years later, baby Editha passed away before her first birthday. For Edith, these deaths aggravated the fears that she had been suppressing since childhood. She had always been wary of the outside world, strangers, noise, commotion. They had had threats of abduction and even death. All of her siblings suffered nervous disorders. But these very real horrors came from inside. Nothing was safe. Another real threat for the McCormicks was mental illness. 2 of Harold's siblings had succumbed to madness. His older sister, Mary Virginia, suffered a mental break in her late teens, to which Harold had a front row seat. And despite their mother's horror at having to do so, Mary Virginia was eventually institutionalized for the rest of her life. And Harold's brother Stanley, brilliant, full of promise, and destined for a life in the harvester business, so close in age to Harold that they had been raised essentially as twins, had been showing signs of emotional instability for some time. In 1904, right after his wedding to Catherine Dexter, Stanley suffered a critical emotional break. Sent first to Boston's McLean's Hospital, and later installed in a family estate built in California, Stanley was diagnosed with dementia praecox, now schizophrenia, and vacillated between bouts of catatonia, bursts of aggression, and occasional periods of lucidity. Doctors surmised that it was the pressure of his marriage to Catherine that caused the break, and she was never allowed to spend time with him again. Catherine, the first woman to graduate from MIT with a degree in biology, argued for decades for endocrine testing, but the doctors pushed her ideas aside. Edith's sister Bessie suffered as well, forcing her husband, brilliant philosopher Charles Strong, to witness as she babbled incoherently and worried endlessly and needlessly of impoverishment. Bessie died in 1906 following a stroke. Surely they must have worried who would be next. And while now oldest child Fowler seemed healthy in all aspects, daughter Muriel had a volatile personality, prone to extreme outbursts of temper, and youngest daughter Mathilde suffered from respiratory difficulties from birth and required special treatment. There was plenty of worry to go around. Meanwhile, President McKinley was assassinated. Meanwhile, journalist Ida Tarbell wrote a scathing series about John Dee in McClure's magazine. Meanwhile, over 600 people died in the Iroquois Theater fire in Chicago. And meanwhile, the Titanic sank. Disillusioned with the treatment that she'd received at a variety of sanatoriums over her life, Edith traveled to Zurich for treatment under a yet little-known analyst named Carl Jung. What was intended to be a stay of just a few months grew into 8 years. Edith thrived in Zurich, living in a hotel, freed from her social commitments, no longer responsible for 2 households or for her family. Her son Fowler was at Grouten, her daughter Mathilde at a sanatorium in the mountains of Davos, and her other daughter Muriel was overseen in Zurich by their governess. Edith was able to focus on herself. Jung suggested a course of academic study for Edith, and she took to this like a fish to water. The bulk of her time in Switzerland would be spent learning. It was quite a diverse program of studies, including languages, history, philosophy, astronomy, music, and biology, with professors from the University of Zurich who conducted private lessons with her in the hotel. After Edith's death, an independent scholar analyzed her personal library. It contained over 15,000 volumes, enough to rival some university libraries at the time, and a tremendous collection of Kant, Nietzsche, and Goethe. A skilled linguist, Edith always read in the author's native language, and she made notes in the margins in that language. She continued this study for the rest of her life. It is possible that Edith did more for Jung than he did for her. She became one of his greatest financial supporters, underwriting translations of his writings into English and other languages, as well as providing space for use as a psychological club where followers of Jung's methods could attend lectures, socialize, and interact. Perhaps in exchange for Edith's generosity, or perhaps because he genuinely believed that she understood his methods and philosophies, Jung anointed her as an analyst. She also supported artists who had taken refuge in neutral Switzerland. In addition to composers such as Otto Luning and Philipp Jarnach, Edith underwrote James Joyce for 1.5 years as he wrote Ulysses. There were other aspects to Edith and Harold's life in Switzerland. Harold had been appointed a procurement officer for the war, handling requests for supplies. Word was out that the McCormicks were in town, and they were bombarded with financial requests, such as when they hosted 59 American POWs for dinner at their hotel. The men had been captured and thrown aboard the steamer the Yarrowdale as prisoners and subsequently spent 3 months in a prison camp. The McCormicks also provided 50 francs and new clothing for each man. The McCormicks also donated generously toward a project in Parma, Italy, the construction of a massive arch to celebrate the centennial of composer Giuseppe Verdi's birth. Sadly, the arch was badly damaged during the Second World War and no longer stands. But the most dramatic event they must have been involved with involved a French flying ace. Lieutenant Eugene Gilbert had been forced to make an emergency landing on Swiss soil. He was kept under guard in a barracks in Zurich. But one night, the guard mysteriously wandered off, leaving him unattended. A getaway car whisked him to Lausanne. Then a high-speed motorboat rushed him over Lake Geneva to Evian, a French city on the far side. While nothing could be proven as to the McCormicks' involvement, with Harold's interest in aviation and all manner of speedy vehicles, there was much speculation. Furthermore, Gilbert had been seen in their company at their hotel. Harold, who had traveled back and forth between Zurich and Chicago repeatedly, returned to Chicago in 1918 to fully assume his role as head of International Harvester. And this was when the family really began to fall apart. In a story worthy of its own opera, and in fact, it serves as the basis for the love triangle in the movie Citizen Kane. An aspiring opera singer tracked down Harold in search of a part with the Chicago Grand Opera, and in no time at all, he was smitten. Her name was Ganna Walska, and that was the stage name. Hideous voice, but beautiful. She had just been widowed by her second husband, a wealthy New York doctor. Having met Ganna in New York and started some sort of relationship in the States, Harold engineered to cross the Atlantic aboard the same steamer, the Aquitania. Also aboard was bachelor Alexander Smith Cochrane, also known as the Carpet King. Both Harold and Smith Cochrane wooed Ganna on board, with Harold asking if she would marry him if he were single. She declined. Harold continued on to Zurich and begged Edith for a divorce. She refused. He persisted, and eventually Edith acquiesced. Harold rushed to Paris to tell Ganna the good news, only to find that she had married the Carpet King in the meantime. Broken-hearted, he wrote, "I am suffering, I am tortured." He returned to Zurich to patch up his ailing marriage. It was at this point that after 8 years in Switzerland, despite fairly crippling travel phobias, that Edith finally managed to return to the United States. She brought back a friend from Zurich, Edwin Krenn, a young Austrian who claimed to be an architect. He'd come to Zurich for analysis, and he developed what would be a lifelong relationship with Edith. Whether they were lovers or just friends would be the subject of considerable conjecture for years to come. Whatever their relationship, Edith would be the loyal friend that Edith had lacked thus far. Edith intended to visit her father in New York after disembarking the steamer, but he refused to welcome Edwin. After several rounds of telegrams, Edith would return to Chicago without having seen her father. He did not approve of her time with young of her having abandoned his Baptist beliefs or of her new friend. There were considerable challenges for Edith, despite the fact that she had returned to the States in the hopes of mending the relationship. Harold wanted a divorce, and he assembled a powerhouse legal team, including Clarence Darrow. The financial settlement, in which Edith had to buy Harold out of both of their houses, would be a staggering financial blow to her for years. Harold was still hoping to snag Ganna Volska, whose marriage, her third, to the Carpet King, had fallen apart. In preparation for his union with this younger woman, he underwent a controversial gland transplant intended to rejuvenate his libido. He swore everyone to secrecy, but someone had tapped his phone lines, and soon it was front page news across the country. He was subsequently asked to resign from International Harvester, which he did before traveling to Europe to marry Ganna. Another challenge for Edith was that her youngest daughter, Mathilde, who had been raised primarily in that Davos sanatorium, had fallen in love with her riding instructor, Max Ozer, a Swiss gentleman, roughly 30 years her senior. 18-year-old Mathilde did marry Max, much to Edith's dismay, and that was front page news as well. Edith's life after returning from Zurich was markedly different than pre-1913. She entertained far less frequently and generally only when special guests, such as Prince William of Sweden or Queen Marie of Romania, were in town. Her entertainment consisted of opera, chamber concerts, theater, and that new diversion, the movies. The newspapers followed her movements closely and always reported on where she went, who she was with, usually Edwin, and what she wore. On one occasion, she made the reporters giddy when she announced at a dinner party that she was the reincarnation of Anka Essen Paaten, King Tut's child bride. Having given land to the Cook County Forest Preserve District for the express purpose of building a zoo, Edith would become the godmother of Brookfield Zoo, although she was only marginally involved with the actual planning. She also sat on the planning board for the Women's World Fairs, which took place in the mid-1920s. She was considered the keenly intellectual member of the group. But her main enterprise was her own real estate firm, which she started with Edwin and an old Ukrainian friend of his, Edward Dado. Edith provided the funds for Krenin Dado, and Edwin and Edward handled the business end. They started with one salesman, a taxi driver, who sold lots that Edith owned adjacent to what was to become Brookfield Zoo. But within a couple of years, they had grown to one of the nation's largest real estate firms, employing hundreds of real estate agents. They sold lots to over 16,000 Chicagoans for over $26 million. Here's a few of the neighborhoods, and there were actually a fair amount up here. So it's possible that you've seen some of the Crenindado homes. They even started plans for a utopian community near Kenosha, Edithton. While the blueprints called for luxury living on the lake, it also included plans for a national university, a place where professors from colleges around the country could come in the summer to learn from each other and recharge their batteries. It included its own radio station and airport, as well as sporting facilities large enough to host future Olympic Games. Sadly, it would never be built. Edith had carved out a new life for herself. Despite the shame of the divorce, Harold's scandalous surgery, and the fact that her family had abandoned her, her children siding with Harold, and her father and brother disapproving of her life choices. Edith's story does not end well. When the real estate market slowed in 1927, followed by the stock market crash of 1929, she was left holding thousands of acres of land that no one could buy. Many of her investors defaulted on their mortgages, and instead of evicting them, she absorbed the blow herself. Due to the terrible divorce settlement and the unforeseen national crash, Edith was left begging her father and brother for funds. They refused, saying time and again, "I regret that it would not be in your best interest for us to provide this assistance." Breast cancer delivered the final blow for Edith. A month before her death, Edith's brother set her up in a suite at the Drake Hotel, provided that she fire her staffs and close up her 2 houses. I believe she could see her bastion out the window. Edith died in August 1932 at the age of 59. On the day of her funeral, thousands lined the streets to honor Chicago's patron saint. Her brother and family must have been stunned to see the affection for Edith, the acknowledgement of all that she had given to the city: opera, a zoo, community theater, real estate, an infectious diseases institute that she and Harold founded after their first son Jack's death would help curb scarlet fever. Her first will stated that her home was to become the Rockefeller McCormick Museum of Chicago, which institution shall be a gallery of art, a museum of antiquities, and other rare and beautiful articles, in order that it may aid in encouraging and developing the study of the fine arts and of advancing the general knowledge of kindred subjects. However, due to the debts that she had incurred, her carefully collected belongings were auctioned off, sold for pennies on the dollar during the Depression. The museums were not to be. Some historians believe that Edith's papers were destroyed after her death, perhaps by Harold and her brother Junior. I can't prove this to be true, but I can attest to the fact that while the other family members, including the women, have large collections in the family archives, Edith's files are quite limited. As a woman with markedly different beliefs and interests than the men around her, it seems they may have erased her tracks. Had she been born male, Edith's life trajectory would have been different from the get-go. As it was, she did what she could to elevate her adopted city of Chicago to a vital city with more cultural and artistic offerings. And though her name has largely disappeared from our history books, many of us here in Chicago have benefited from her lasting gifts. Thank you for this opportunity to tell her story.
Wonderful presentation, Andrea. Arnie will go around and see what questions there are from our audience. I have a question. Well, we have one from the audience. Go, please.
Wonderful.
Thank you. Thanks.
Wonderful. Could you say something about her burial place?
I could. I have to ask though, you were nodding during the performance. I'm guessing during my talk. I'm guessing that you've read the book. Yes, okay. Thank you for that. I appreciate that. And I'm sorry, say that again.
And I lectured on Edith McCormick as well, so I'm very familiar with her.
Oh, you and I must speak afterwards. I would enjoy that. Yes, so the question is, could I speak about her burial place? Yes, it's somewhat heartbreaking. She is buried in Graceland Cemetery here in Chicago. It took a long time, it took decades for her to be buried there. Her body was stored in a vault for many years until Fowler finally took care of the details. She is buried next to a pond near where Daniel Burnham is buried, if any of you know where that is. But it is Edith's grave, and then her two children, Jack and Editha, are buried near her, the ones who died quite young. On the other side of the pond, you have the McCormick clan. Harold, sibling, brothers, sisters, nieces, nephews. It's a huge assortment. And to me, it's kind of a symbol of Edith's separation from the McCormick clan and also from the Rockefeller clan. You know, she's not buried near any of her siblings or any of her other family members aside from her two young children. So thank you for that question.
I kept thinking this should be a movie, but it can't be a movie. There's too much information. Have you ever thought about doing a documentary on Netflix or something like that? It would be fascinating.
Yeah, so I've received that question before. I love the idea of a movie about her life. I don't have those sorts of powers. Maybe some of you do. I don't know. But yeah, it would be a really fascinating life story to tell, wouldn't it? It's back there.
Yes, Andrea, we've had 45 people on Zoom enjoying this as well. The question I have is, did any of the children do anything significant that you know of, or what happened with that thread?
Oh, yes. Okay. So she had the three surviving children, right? So Fowler lived a long, healthy life, I would say, and he was briefly the head of International Harvester, so following in the footsteps that he needed to follow in, whether he wanted to or not, I believe. He married his best friend's mother. Um, at the time, I believe, was this in the 20s, I think, there was a very scandalous divorce proceeding taking place on the front pages of all the newspapers in the Stillman family. He was the head of a big New York bank, and Fifi was his very kind of flamboyant wife. Anyways, big scandal. And there's a letter from John D. Rockefeller to Fowler saying, I have read in the papers that you may be engaged to Anne Stillman, who was the daughter of the two involved in this divorce. He said, we cannot be involved with such a scandalous situation. I'm sure you understand. I hope there's no truth to this story. And Fowler wrote back very honestly that he was not involved with Anne. He was in fact involved with Fifi, the mother. And as soon as that divorce became complete, he married Fifi, and they remained married for the remainder of their lives. He did not have any biological children of his own. He had these step friends, including his college roommate, became one of his technically stepchildren, but was a very well-loved uncle and grandfather and so on. Mathilde, who married Max Ozer, her riding instructor, they had two children. It was not a happy marriage. It didn't last a terribly long time, but it did result in Peter Ozer and Anita Ozer. Peter died without having any children of his own. He died fairly young. But Anita married Linus Pauling Jr., the son of the double Nobel Prize winner. And they had a number of children. That family is doing well. They are spread out around the world. They were very helpful in this process. And it's been delightful to get to know what became of some of these genes. And then Muriel, who was the one who had kind of an explosive temper from the get-go. Just before Edith died, she married a gentleman a few decades older than herself, Elisha Dyer Hubbard. He died without, they didn't have any children together. Muriel later adopted two different sets of children, but she was an unfit mother. It is believed she was an alcoholic and perhaps abusive, and Fowler intervened through the courts to have the children removed from her custody. So it's kind of a rocky road there for the Rockefeller McCormick descendants, but thank you for the question.
Andrea, that's a great story. And I'm so glad to hear it again. There was a problem at her wedding to Harold. Do you want to discuss that?
Yes. And I have to say, so nice to see you again, Don Packard. Don's daughter, Susan, and I went to high school together and played in the band together. And we were in touch a few years ago when you had me speak for a group here. So yeah, so a problem at the wedding. Yes, it was twofold. One was that Harold got so sick right before the wedding that they had to scrap all of their plans. She was not happy that father had declared that they had to have the wedding at the Fifth Avenue Baptist Church. It was really not ideal for a wedding. But she had the first several rows of pews removed so she could bring in the ferns and the orchids and all of that. But then Harold had pleurisy, came down with pleurisy. His doctors said he cannot venture out, that is not safe. So they wed in his hotel suite with only the immediate family members nearby. Harold was leaning on his brother Stanley's shoulder as he gave his vows. It was just a tremendous storm going on outside. So even though the wedding, it was in late November, it was noon, but the sky was completely black and they had to light all the lights and carry on. So afterwards, they did have a reception in the Rockefeller family home. Harold, of course, couldn't attend, so Edith went on her own and greeted the guests and thanked them for coming. It's kind of, this is a theme that recurred throughout her life, her absolute devotion to entertaining and to fulfilling her societal role, that she would host parties at the very worst of personal times because she felt that that was her civic duty. And this was the first such instance.
Did Edith have anything to do with McCormick Place or McCormick Spices?
Yes, good question. So in Edith's day, her branch, the Harold McCormick branch, specifically Cyrus McCormick, and then leading down to Harold, that was the branch to be. They had all the money because Cyrus had been credited with inventing the mechanical reaper. And so all of the blessings went to that branch of the family. The other branches got a little annoyed about this and said, hey, this is not how it went down, right? Cyrus did not do this alone. We were all involved and we can prove it. And there were lawsuits and all of this. In Chicago, at the same time as Harold's family, was Colonel Robert McCormick, who you know as the publisher of the Chicago Tribune and someone who was involved in the war and really served as kind of an upstanding citizen. He was technically Harold's uncle, but they were only a few years apart, so they really kind of behaved as cousins. These days, when you hear the name McCormick, the McCormick Family Foundation, McCormick Spice, well, I'm not actually not sure about McCormick Spices. I'm not sure where that one comes from. McCormick Place and so on. That is not the Harold McCormick branch. That is almost always the Robert McCormick branch. So they ended up historically having a far better reputation, shall we say. Are there other questions?
If there are no more questions,
Oh,
That's all right. There's got a comment over here. Thank you. Having read the book and being somewhat closely related, tell us a little bit about the demise of the villa. Is it still standing? Are there houses in Highland Park that are still existing that people can go by and see the type of houses that were developed?
yes.
Land that was in Lake Forest, that what happened to that
Yes.
property?
Yes. So I'll address Yeah, there are three small parts to that. One is her home, the Bastion at 1000 Lakeshore Drive, which stood empty for many years as her estate was settled. It was torn down eventually in the 1950s. Now we have two very large condo buildings standing on that footprint. Her property was right on Michigan Avenue, right where it goes around the Drake there. She owned the entire block between Oak and Bellevue Place. Her home in Lake Forest, Villa Turicum, also stood empty for a long time. However, that one did not have a large metal gate going, a large metal fence surrounding the property, and it was easily accessible from the beach. So therefore, sustained a lot of damage over the years, a lot of graffiti, all the windows were broken. I was at one event such as this, and a gentleman raised his hand, said he remembered running around the hallways of that house with his BB gun, because that's what the kids did, right? They kind of took over. They broke off all bits of statuary that they could and so on. There are pictures available online of how it looked, and I can't even look at it anymore. It's heartbreaking to see what happened to that beautiful home. The property was purchased in the 1960s by the developer Robert Kendler. He said he initially intended to restore the property, but eventually he just broke it into lots. And if you go up to the Villa Turicum subdivision, you will see Rockefeller Street and McCormick Street.
When she and Harold were at their prime, is there an estimate in today's terms of how much money they may have had or what their holdings were? Any idea?
Oh, I can't give you a figure. I can tell you that when they married, she was estimated to be the richest woman in the country. It was, Princess of Standard Oil marries Prince of McCormick Harvester. So it was kind of a royal wedding. But the amount of money that they blew through is unbelievable. They kept having to go to father asking for more money. She just had no sense of how much money she had. She had no concept that there may be a bottom to that amount of money. But I ask you to consider that if a few things that were entirely beyond her control, if they had not happened, her story would have ended very differently. First of all, the divorce settlement, which she didn't want. She didn't want the divorce in the first place. If that had not happened and settled her with this huge financial burden. Second of all, stock market crash, 1929, leaving her with all that land that she couldn't sell. Third, breast cancer, not enough time to recover after the stock market crash. And finally, her father outlived her. So think about those things beyond her control. If one or more of those things had not happened, we would now have the Rockefeller McCormick Museum of Chicago at 1000 Lakeshore Drive. We would all know her name. There would be another museum in Lake Forest called the Rockefeller McCormick Museum of Lake Forest. And it would be filled with these antiquities. We would all know her name. So it's just kind of a reminder that we don't get to determine our fates. We don't get to determine what we're known for. In the end, she is most known for Brookfield Zoo. And honestly, that was not at the top of her list.
Jill has some comments and questions from chat.
All right.
Oh, here.
I will repeat it. Yes. Research and write the book.
How long did it take to research and the book?
Yes. Thank you for the question. And thank you for all of you who are out there in Zoom land. Yeah, it took me 10 years. Rick in the back, my brother-in-law, can attest that I was pretty grouchy for those 10 years. I started out, I had learned about her because of her donation of land for the zoo. And I thought, oh, she's a great character. I'd like to write historical fiction about this goofy character. And so that's how it started. And then as I researched, I found all this stuff and it just kept growing and growing. But it turns out I'm really not meant to be a fiction writer because it was rejected time and again. And so I rewrote it in a slightly different format, again, rejected over and over again. All of these steps take years of rewriting and submitting and rejecting and then picking yourself up and trying again. I have 6 different versions of the manuscript in my house.
There is another question from Darlene in chat. There are streets named Dado and Crane in Highland Park. How does this relate to Edith?
Yes, Dado and Kren, those are streets in the Highland Park Highlands, where Edith's real estate firm of Kren and Dado built a number of houses. So some of those houses still stand. There are several in the Highland Park Highlands. There is a skyscraper at 3300 Lakeshore Drive that they built, and then all sorts of much smaller family homes. They developed mainly, they bought up the land along the new L lines, which was brilliant, actually, because now people had great transportation into the city. So they're kind of spread all along that stretch.
You know, the amount of information that you have is so wonderful. The way you presented it is excellent. I second what Don Packard said, which is you really need to put this on some kind of a Netflix 1 hour. I think you certainly could be worthy to do that.
Thank you. I would love to, but I don't know how to go about that part of it. But thank you so much for your time today. I do have books available for sale if you want to see me up. Thank you so much.